When the Adidas Adios Pro was released in 2020, it instantly secured a spot as one of the best super shoes ever made. But how does this shoe hold up over time? Let's take it out for one more run and see how this shoe is doing after 100 miles. 15.88 miles, 8 minutes, 1 second per mile, 151 beats per minute today, taking the Adios Pro out for a long run. And today's workout was a 4-mile warm-up, 10 miles at moderate pace, followed by a set of 4 strides and then a 1-mile cool down. And with today's effort, I was able to get the Adios Pro to the 100-mile mark. Before I give you my thoughts on this shoe after 100 miles, I do want to go over some disclosures. This is a pair of shoes that I purchased myself. No one sent it to me. No one's paying me to make this video. And no one's going to get a chance to preview any of my footage or my thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. So with that disclosure out of the way, let's talk about the Adidas Adios Pro after 100 miles. First, let's go over the specs of this shoe. This shoe is full of Light Strike Pro foam, which is a new foam that we saw from Adidas last year with the release of this shoe. And inside the shoe, there is just a bunch of technology. There is a half carbon fiber plate in the rear portion of the shoe, and in the front portion of the shoe, there are carbon fiber rods that are supposed to line up with the bones of your foot. So rather than having a plate, there are rods underneath that give you that carbon fiber plate effect. On the outsole, there's only but the tiniest amount of rubber coverage, very, very thin. No tread at all, just the rubber. It's like racing slicks. And on the upper, we have Adidas's Cellular Mesh, which is an unbelievable material that is very breathable, very strong, but also forgiving at the same time. This is one of the most comfortable racing uppers that I've ever raced in. It's not exactly a foot-shaped toe box, but as far as racing shoes go, I feel like this one gives me an ample amount of space in here while still maintaining that racer fit. Around back, you've got just the tiniest amount of material around the heel collar. It kind of looks and feels like a tennis ball to me. It provides just a tiny amount of comfort for the parts of this shoe that are going to touch your ankle. Otherwise, in the heel cup, there's no support. It's super floppy. There's not really anything back here. It's just hugging your ankle and your heel, and it sticks right on. The upper is just absolutely fantastically executed, fits really good. I've never had any issues at all with this Cellular Mesh material. Now with that Light Strike foam, we do have a tall stack height in the back. We've got 40 millimeters of that Light Strike Pro foam and an 8.5 millimeter drop, giving us 31.5 millimeters of stack height in the forefoot. And that's that Light Strike Pro foam with the carbon fiber plate in the back and the metatarsal rods in the forefoot. And this entire package comes in at 8 ounces. So next, let's talk about what it's like to actually run in the shoe. The Light Strike Pro foam is a firm foam. It's not super squishy. You're not gonna really sink into it, but it's not a hard foam. It's just more firm. And so what that means for me is at slower speeds, it just kind of feels like this is a little bit dense of a material. For example, in my warm-up or in the rest phases, if I'm taking the shoe out for a workout. But once you start getting up to moderate pace, half marathon, threshold, 10K, 5K pace, even faster than that, that's when the foam really starts to loosen up and it feels like your foot pushes into the foam and then the foam then gives that energy back to you as you're toeing off and getting into the next stride. And so what that firmness does for me, if I'm gonna compare it to say another super foam like the Zoom X foam, I think the Zoom X foam compresses and decompresses really quickly. So it's a very snappy kind of compression and decompression. The Light Strike Pro foam, to me, takes a little bit longer. It's got to be just a fraction of a second that is different in terms of the timing. So when the carbon and the Light Strike Pro foam are both engaged. I feel like you're getting a nice absorption of the impact of the road, and then you get a nice push off from that foam decompressing and from the carbon rods decompressing as well, giving you a really powerful sense at push off with each stride. I've taken this shoe out for all sorts of paces. I've taken it for long runs. I've taken it through the snow, on dirt roads, pavement, wet surfaces like I had for today. It was kind of raining for part of my run out there today. And I've taken it for all sorts of faster workouts and virtual races. I didn't do any in-person racing in the time that I've had this shoe, but I did an 8K virtual race. I did the Shamrock Shuffle virtually this year in this shoe. And most recently, I did a virtual half marathon. I did the Eugene Marathon, the virtual half, just this last weekend. And for all of those type of running situations, I've really been enjoying the Adios Pro and that Light Strike foam. What I would say about this shoe overall is that I think that the shoe is the best for me in terms of the amount of force that I put into the ground and my stride and the amount of power that I'm putting out. For me, this shoe works the best at half marathon pace, anywhere between threshold and half marathon pace. That's where I feel like the shoe is in a sweet spot for me. I feel like I'm pushing hard enough where I'm getting the Light Strike Pro compressed. I'm getting the carbon fiber rods compressed so that way they can fully give me back everything that I'm putting in. When I'm on an easier run, like today, not that today was an easy run, but when the effort is not as intense, when I'm working at moderate paces or closer to marathon pace, at that speed, I think I'm feeling a lot of the Light Strike Pro. And that's still a very good feeling and I'm enjoying it, but I don't think I'm getting kind of everything out of the shoe like I do when I get towards half marathon pace or even faster in the Adios Pro. Now let's talk about how the shoe is held up over time. Let's first take a look at the outsole. I had a lot of concerns about this outsole. First, I had concerns about the grip. Like I thought, what if it gets wet? What are we gonna do when it wears? There's so little rubber on this outsole and there's no treads on it at all. How is this possibly going to work? Well, I could tell you that even under wet conditions, this outsole worked just fine. Even in some snowy road conditions, the shoe had a surprising amount of grip. I'm not saying that it's a snowshoe or it's a shoe that you can race a trail snow race in, but considering the conditions that I run in this shoe, I was super impressed with just how much traction I was actually able to get out of this shoe. And I'm also impressed with how well the rubber has held up over the last 100 miles that I put into this racing shoe. I'm not seeing any places where it's worn through. There's no exposed areas of the Light Strike Pro. I mean, there's the exposed Light Strike Pro, but there's nothing where I've worn through any of the rubber. Even some of the areas where I normally tend to see a very high amount of wear, which is usually like on this lateral side back towards the heel, I'm seeing just a tiny amount of wear there, but not a ton. I am seeing some grooves that are developing like in this shoe, but it's not that this is something that's happened at the 100-mile mark. These grooves were kind of there from the beginning, right out of the box. I kind of saw kind of the faint shadows of them. And then after the first maybe 2 runs, these grooves developed, but they haven't really gotten any worse over time either. So the amount of wear that's on the outsole is, or the lack of wear, has been a real surprise. Another surprise is how well this Light Strike Pro foam is holding up as well. It doesn't feel to me like this is a shoe that's nearing the end of its useful racing life. Generally, my approach with the Marathon Super shoes is I feel like right around to 125 miles, I'm happy to line up to any race in a Marathon Super shoe. And after that, that's usually about the time to start thinking maybe it's time to relegate this to being the workout shoe. Maybe you still bring it out for your threshold workouts, but maybe not for racing. I feel very comfortable. I know I'm at the 100 mark, not at the 125 mile mark yet in this shoe, but I feel very comfortable in lacing up this shoe for a longer race, even now. And I think that it's gonna have a lot more longevity to it, especially since the rubber also seems to be doing really well on the outsole. So a lot more durability from this shoe than I was expecting, especially considering for the fact for these racing shoes, I'm not really expecting that much durability at all. Same goes for the upper. The upper is holding up really well. It's starting to get very discolored and dirty from the miles that I put into it, but in terms of the overall look of the shoe, I mean, it has kind of that faded, kind of like a worn, like pre-worn 3 stripes paint design on here anyway, so I feel like it just looks better the more you kind of beat it up. But as far as wear goes, I'm not seeing any of this soft material around The heel collar, starting to see any wear. It's just some discoloration, some staining. And there's no areas where I feel like I'm starting to wear through this cellar mesh. Like I said, the cellar mesh is a super strong material and it's holding up fine. No areas where there's any undue rubbing, and there's no areas where my toes are starting to poke through. Nothing like that. Other than the discoloration and the fact that it's kind of like molding itself a little bit to kind of like the shape of my foot. It's not stretching, but it's kind of like getting worn in. Other than that, it feels like a brand new shoe to run in this. The one thing that I will note over the miles that I put in it is that it's not the lightest shoe. At 8.0 ounces, there are lighter shoes that are out there. I don't think that that's really a problem with this shoe, at least not for the distances that I think that this shoe is best suited for. But that being said, I did get the shoe I get the shoe wet frequently, but I got it very wet today because rainy conditions were out there for the entire time. I was on my midweek long run for this week, and the shoe did start to feel a little bit heavy towards the end of the run. I just felt like the shoe got wet and it stayed wet, and I wish it could have kind of like shed some of that water a little bit better, keeping in mind that it was still kind of wet everywhere out there. So I don't mind my feet getting wet, but I do feel like I was picking up a little bit of extra weight. I don't know if that's coming from the cellar mesh or sitting in the insole or where it's coming from, but it did feel a little bit of heaviness in the shoe. Overall, I'd say that the Adidas Adios Pro for 2020 was my favorite super shoe that I ran in. And the refreshing surprise in 2021 is that even after 100 miles, I think that there's plenty of life left in this shoe. And it also makes me super excited for what's to come from Adidas later in this year. There's going to be a complete redesign of the Boston and the Boston 10. I'm looking forward to the Adios Pro 2 and some of the other crazy early images that I've been seeing for some other Adidas shoes that are coming on down the pike. So very excited for what Adidas is going to be doing in the distance running space. So those are my thoughts on the Adios Pro after 100 miles. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any questions, or better yet, feel free to stop by the live stream I do just about every day on YouTube. I'd love to interact with you live over there. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of the video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?